Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into global wealth and income inequality. And let's be real, the numbers get, well, kind of intense.
It's true. This latest OXFAM report is pretty stark.
Mhm.
It really digs into how global wealth is, well, less distributed and more like concentrated.
Right. Okay. So Oxfam comes out swinging, says that in 2020, while, pandemic and all, the five richest people, like, doubled their wealth. Doubled. But get this, the bottom 60%, that's like what, 5 billion people, saw their wealth actually shrink. How's that even possible?
It's a powerful example of the growing divide between, the ultra-rich and, well, everyone else. And geographically, the report breaks it down starkly. Think about this. 4 out of 5 people live in the global south, right?
Hmm.
But, and this is wild, they only controlled about a third of the world's wealth.
Whoa, so you're saying most of the world's wealth is concentrated in the global north, even though most people live elsewhere?
Yeah, exactly. To give you an idea, per capita GDP, like average income per person, in the global north, it's almost 10 times higher than in the global south. Like two different worlds.
That's wow. Okay. And it gets crazier. When you look at the absolute wealthiest, the top like 0.001%.
Right, a tiny group, only around 51,700 people, controls a ridiculous 6.4% of all the wealth. Imagine like the population of, I don't know, a small city having the same wealth as half the planet.
It's hard to even wrap your head around, but it's not just those at the very top, is it?
No, definitely not. This wealth concentration, it's pretty consistent across the board. The richest 10%, they hold between 60% and 80% of the wealth almost everywhere you look. It's a global thing.
So no matter where you are, chances are a small group controls most of the wealth, but it's more than just
The-
location,
I
right?
got it. It's way more nuanced. We got to look at how inequality intersects with things like race and gender to see the full picture.
Right. Like in the US, the report found the typical black family has only about 16 cents for every dollar of wealth a typical white family has. That's a huge difference.
And globally, women hold a staggering $105 trillion less wealth than men. That's like 4 times the entire U.S. economy. So yeah, geography is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle.
Like this perfect storm of systemic disadvantages, which brings us to income inequality, which, no surprise, seems to mirror these wealth gaps.
For sure. You're way more likely to have a high income if your family already had resources, connections, all that. The report talks about inherited capital.
Hmm.
And it's not just inheriting money, right? It's the advantages you get if you grow up with, say, good schools, networks, even just the expectation that you'll go to college and get a high-paying job.
It's like this cycle, passing inequality down through generations, but it's more than just luck, right? There are systems in place that make it harder for certain groups to succeed.
Absolutely. Look at Brazil. The report shows how historical and systemic racism still affects income inequality. White Brazilians, on average, earn a crazy 70% more than Afro-Brazilians. Shows you these gaps are rooted in deep, deep societal structures.
That's sobering. Makes you wonder if we're all just playing a rigged game. How do we even start to dismantle these systems and, I don't know, make things fairer?
It's complex, no doubt, but recognizing the scale of these inequalities, how interconnected they are, that's a crucial first step.
Hmm.
And that's what reports like this one from Oxfam do. They force us to confront these, well, uncomfortable truths.
And speaking of systemic disadvantages, this report really gets into the gender pay gap.
Yeah, it's, kind of disheartening that even with all the progress we've made, women still earn less than men for the same work, even when you consider things like education, experience, that kind of stuff. Actually, the report states that between 2015 and 2020, women earned just a little over 1/3 of global labor income.
Wait, just one third. So for every dollar a man earned, a woman made what, like 33 cents? That's insane.
It is a huge difference, for sure. And it's not just a global average or anything, this gap. It's everywhere, though it is worse in some places. The report mentions data from the OECD showing that in the EU, the average is 11% less for women doing the same work as men. But in South Korea, it's a whopping 31.2% difference.
31.2%. Jeez. What's the reason for that? Is it just straight up discrimination or are there other things going on?
It's complicated. The report points to a few key factors. Discrimination's still a thing, sadly, but it's not always, blatant. There's also occupational segregation.
Occupational segregation, meaning like women end up in certain fields that just happen to pay less.
Exactly. And it's not really a coincidence. A lot of these jobs, they were traditionally seen as, women's work, stuff like caregiving, nurturing, domestic tasks. So because of that, they've always been undervalued, both in terms of pay and, I guess, how society sees them.
It's almost like those old-fashioned ideas about women's roles. They still have this powerful effect on the opportunities women have today.
You're spot on. And then you've got the unequal burden of care work. It's still mostly women taking care of kids, elderly parents, all the household stuff. And that obviously makes it tough for women to, fully participate in the workforce,
Hmm.
which then affects how much money they can make.
So it's not enough to just like get women into higher paying jobs. We have to fix these deeper issues, the barriers that stop them from even getting there in the first place.
You said it. We got to address the root causes, not just the symptoms. And while the report does say things have improved slightly with the pay gap, it also stresses that the progress is way too slow. This gap is still a huge problem in most of the world.
Feels like we're trying to outrun an avalanche, hoping it'll just like melt away. But realistically, we need something way more drastic to make a real
That's a
difference.
powerful way to put it. And that leads us to what the report calls the bigger picture here, the role of neoliberal economic policies in driving this inequality.
You're saying there's a link between the rise of neoliberalism and this growing gap between the rich and everyone else.
That's right. The report argues that these policies, deregulation, privatization, cutting social safety nets, all that, they've had a huge impact on global inequality over the past few decades.
Like taking resources from the people who need them most and just, I don't know, funneling them upwards. The rich get richer, the middle class disappears, and the poor are just left scrambling to survive.
Exactly. The report suggests that these policies have created this system where the wealthy have all the advantages, letting them grab even more wealth and power. Meanwhile, it's getting harder and harder for everyone else to, get ahead.
Reminds me of that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. But it's more like some boats are getting to be mega yachts while others are sinking.
Yeah, that's a good way to see it. The OXFAM report makes a strong argument that this isn't sustainable. All this inequality, it weakens societies, it leads to instability, and in the end, it holds back billions of people. It's a recipe for disaster, really.
So then what? This report paints a pretty bleak picture, and it's easy to feel overwhelmed by all this. What are we supposed to do as individuals when we're talking about something this big and systemic?
I get it, it can feel overwhelming. But remember, these aren't just numbers on a page. They represent real people and real struggles. And that's exactly why it's so important to be having these conversations, raising awareness, pushing for change. That's where it starts.
So it's not just about understanding the problem, it's about actually doing something about it. But where do we even begin with something as huge and complex as this? It's like we're looking up at this, I don't know, giant wall, and getting to a fairer world seems almost impossible. Where do we even begin?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge for sure. But the report gives some concrete things we can do, individually and as a, global society.
Okay, so give us some hope here. What can we actually do?
One big thing the report pushes for is progressive taxation systems.
You mean making sure the wealthiest individuals and corporations pay their fair share?
Exactly. The system, right now, it often feels rigged for the people at the top, right?
Yeah.
We need to make it so everyone contributes fairly, so we've got the resources for things like public education, healthcare, affordable housing, all that. Those are the things that actually level the playing field and, give everyone a chance.
It's like recognizing that having a strong safety net, it helps everyone, not just those who, need it most directly.
Totally. And of course, we can't forget about that gender pay gap.
Right.
Got to tackle that head on. Breaking down those systemic barriers holding women back, that's crucial. Means addressing occupational segregation like we talked about, fighting for affordable childcare, pushing for policies that let everyone, men and women, have a decent work-life balance.
So it's about recognizing like the invisible work so many women do and finding ways to share that more equally.
Exactly. Creating a world where everyone has a real shot at success, where your background, your gender, where you're from, none of that determines your whole future.
It's about like giving people agency, the power to reach their full potential.
Right. It's a huge undertaking, no doubt. But the first step is realizing that this isn't like just how things are. These disparities, these injustices, they're because of choices we made as a society.
And if we made those choices, we can unmake them, right? We can choose to build a better, fairer world. That's a powerful thought.
It really is. And it starts with these conversations, with awareness, education, really understanding how complex this issue of global wealth and income inequality truly is.
It starts with asking the hard questions, with challenging the way things are, and demanding better from our leaders and, yeah, from ourselves, too.
Yep.
And on that note, we'll link to the full OXFAM report in the show notes so you can, dive in and learn more.
Yeah, it's worth a read. It really makes you think about the world, the systems we live in, and your place in all of it.
Makes you think, in a world with so much wealth, why are so many people still just trying to get by? It's a question worth asking, and we encourage you to do just that. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into global wealth and income inequality. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions.